If you walked into the parking lot of Greenridge Mall that cold Sunday morning, you might have missed it at first. Just another empty shopping cart pushed against a snowbank. But if you looked closely, if you stopped, you'd see two small eyes peeking through a shredded blanket, wide with fear and glassy with cold. No one knew how long he'd been there. Most people walked past. One even tossed a half-eaten sandwich toward the cart before driving off. The cub didn't move. He barely breathed. 2 nights before, a storm had swept through Washington state, freezing rain turning the town to glass. Tom Beller, 67, had spent that night the way he spent most, alone in his recliner, watching old VHS tapes and trying not to think about his wife's empty chair. Cancer had taken Linda last winter. Since then, the silence in his home had grown roots, and it clung to everything. Even his dog, Wiley, had passed the year before. He was a man with no one left to talk to and no reason to go anywhere but the grocery store and back. Tom's morning routine hadn't changed in months. Coffee by 6, oatmeal by 7, list checked 3 times before driving to the same Safeway where the cashier knew not to ask about his day. That morning, though, something was off. The parking lot was unusually quiet, and as he turned off the engine, he noticed people avoiding a particular row of carts. Some glanced toward it and then quickly away. Curiosity nudged him, and he shuffled closer. At first, he thought someone had abandoned a child. The small figure curled in the cart was bundled up in torn towels and an old hoodie. Then he saw the fur thick, matted, and wet. A baby bear. No tag, no crate, no note. Just this tiny creature, shaking uncontrollably, his paws tucked under him like he was trying to disappear. Tom looked around. Nothing. No mother bear nearby, no animal control, no one claiming it. Just the low hum of idling cars and a cub who didn't belong. The bear couldn't have been more than 4 months old. Too small to be out on his own, much less in a shopping cart surrounded by concrete and people who didn't want to get involved. One teenager pointed him out to a friend, laughing nervously before pulling out a phone. "Is that even legal?" someone muttered nearby. Tom didn't hear all of it. His eyes were locked on the cub's dark, wet, and full of something that pulled at something deep in his chest. He didn't know what it was yet, just that it hurt. He approached slowly, hands out, heart pounding. The cub flinched but didn't growl, didn't run. He had no strength left. Tom could see his ribs under the fur, the pink showing on his nose where it had scraped something rough. He recognized that look. It was the same one Linda had near the end, resigned, tired, waiting for whatever came next. Tom stood frozen, his breath clouding in the cold, one hand still hovering near the cart, unsure what to do next. A mall security truck turned the corner, headlights sweeping over them. Tom instinctively moved in front of the cart. He didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct, maybe guilt. Maybe it was just easier to protect someone else than deal with his own emptiness. The truck slowed but didn't stop, then kept driving. The cub didn't react. No panic, no movement. Just a small, broken breath, barely audible. Tom reached into his coat and pulled out a granola bar. It was the only food he had on him. He tore it in half and gently placed one piece on the edge of the cart. The cub sniffed but didn't move. Then, slowly, with the kind of caution that only comes from pain, he inched forward and took a bite. A single, soft chew, then another. Tom felt his throat tighten. He hadn't seen a living thing eat in front of him since the hospice nurse gave Linda her last spoon of pudding. A woman walked by, tugging her kid's hand a little faster as she glanced over. "Don't look," she said under her breath. "It's sick or something." Tom turned toward her, a spark of anger rising for the first time in months, but she was already gone. The cub looked up again, crumbs stuck to his nose. Tom exhaled slowly. This wasn't just an animal left behind. It was something else. Something thrown away, like he had been. A gust of wind blew snow into the cart, and the cub whimpered. That sound, that soft, wounded noise shattered something in Tom. For the first time in nearly a year, he didn't feel like a spectator in his own life. He was there. He was needed. He took off his coat, the heavy wool one Linda had bought him years ago, and draped it over the cub. The bear blinked up at him, not with trust, not yet, but with something close to recognition, and Tom whispered, "You're not staying here." Just as he said it, a voice called out behind him. "Sir, you can't touch that animal." A young man in a security uniform was jogging over, hand on his walkie-talkie. Tom turned, shielding the cart with his body. The cub didn't move. The snow fell harder now, clinging to everything. Time felt slow and sharp, the kind of moment that asks something of you. And Tom, for once, didn't step away. Tom didn't answer right away. The security guard, maybe 25, fresh-faced and nervous, stopped a few feet away, hesitating when he saw what was inside the cart. His eyes widened. Is that what the hell? Tom raised a hand, steady but firm. He's freezing. He's starving. You can call whoever you need to, but I'm not walking away. The guard looked torn, like he wasn't sure if he should argue or help. I think I need to call animal control, he mumbled. Fine, Tom replied, his voice low. But you'd better tell them to bring a blanket. The next 30 minutes passed like a fragile truce. Tom crouched by the cart, holding the edges of his coat up to block the wind. The cub had eaten the rest of the granola bar and now rested his head on a towel that smelled faintly of bleach and plastic. His eyes stayed on Tom, blinking slowly, like he was still deciding if this man was friend or threat. Tom didn't move. Not when people stared, not when more snow started falling, not even when he felt the cold creeping into his fingers. A woman from the coffee shop brought him a paper cup of hot tea without saying a word. A delivery driver paused long enough to snap a photo and shake his head. But Tom didn't care about any of that. His world had narrowed to the tiny, shivering animal before him. He saw everything in that cub, every sleepless night, every empty room, every broken plan that had haunted him since Linda died. And now here was something else broken, left behind in the middle of a place where it didn't belong. Animal control arrived with sirens off but lights flashing. They weren't sure if it was an emergency or a mistake. 2 officers stepped out, bundled in thick jackets and leather gloves. One was older, the other looked barely older than Tom's grandson. Step away from the cart, sir, the older one said. Tom stood slowly. He's not dangerous. He's hurt. And he's just a baby. The officer nodded but kept a cautious distance. We're going to take him. But we'll need your statement. Tom stepped back, hands raised in surrender. But as one of the officers reached for the cub, the bear whimpered again, a sharp, frightened noise that made both men pause. The younger officer looked at Tom. He doesn't want to go with us. Tom's heart twisted. He doesn't know if you'll help or hurt him, he said quietly. Can I ride with you, just until you get him somewhere safe? The officers exchanged a glance. That wasn't protocol. But neither of them had ever seen anything like this. After some hesitation, they agreed. They wrapped the cub in a thermal blanket and gently lifted him out of the cart. He didn't struggle. He just stared at Tom, wide-eyed, like he was asking not to be forgotten. Tom climbed into the back of the van, and the cub was placed beside him in a crate barely big enough to turn around in. The van smelled like antiseptic and animal fur, but Tom didn't notice. His eyes were on the cub, whose paw now rested against the crate wall closest to him. The drive to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center took 20 minutes, and no one spoke. The younger officer drove, eyes fixed on the icy road, while the older one occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror. Tom leaned in close to the crate and whispered nonsense, the way Linda used to talk to Wiley when he was scared. You're okay now, just hang on. We're going somewhere warm. The cub didn't make a sound, but his breathing slowed, and his eyes began to close. At the center, a vet met them at the back door. She looked exhausted but kind. We've got him, she said gently, and the officers handed over the crate. Tom stepped forward. Can I stay? Just until I know he'll be all right. The vet looked at him, studied his face. We usually don't allow visitors during intake, but I think he trusts you. You can wait inside the observation room. She led him through a set of double doors and into a small, glass-walled room overlooking a medical bay. Tom sat stiffly on a metal chair, watching as the vet and her assistant gently examined the cub. They clipped away matted fur, checked for wounds, and inserted a needle into his leg to rehydrate him. The cub whimpered but didn't resist. He's malnourished, hypothermic, and dehydrated, the vet said through the glass. But he's strong. He's a survivor. Tom let out a long breath. He whispered, he is. After an hour, the vet came in and sat beside him. He's stable for now, but we'll need to monitor him closely. He's been through something traumatic, Tom nodded. So have I. The vet looked at him for a long moment. We don't usually name them until they're released, but sometimes the right person gives them one. Tom looked through the glass. The cub was sleeping, curled in a pile of warm towels. "His name's Teddy," he said softly, "like Linda's old stuffed bear. She kept it till the day she died." The vet smiled gently. "Teddy it is." Tom stood, unsure what to do with his hands. "Can I come back, just to check in?" She nodded. "We'll keep you updated. And if you're willing, he might do better with a familiar presence during his rehab." Tom's chest ached, but in a way that felt almost like purpose. He looked at the sleeping cub and felt something shift inside him. A spark, a thread. As he walked out into the cold again, the snow had stopped falling. The world looked softer somehow. He stood beside his car for a long moment. The image of Teddy burned into his mind. Not just an abandoned animal, not just a fluke of fate, but just maybe a second chance for both of them. Tom returned to the wildlife rehab center the very next morning, coffee in one hand, a scarf in the other, the same scarf Linda had knitted for him their last Christmas together. It still smelled faintly of cedar and fireplace. He wasn't sure what he was doing, only that he felt pulled there, like Teddy was a thread connecting him to something unfinished. The receptionist greeted him with surprise but didn't ask questions. "He's awake," she said softly, "and he's been restless all morning." When Tom stepped into the observation room, he didn't expect what happened next. Teddy, still wrapped in bandages, lifted his head the moment Tom appeared. He let out a low, muffled chirp, a sound the vet later explained was rare for cubs in distress. But Tom didn't need an explanation. He knew what it meant: recognition. That moment of eye contact cut through months of grief, a feeling so real it made his knees weak. He sat beside the glass and whispered, "Hey there, buddy. I'm here." The next few days became a routine. Tom brought Teddy bits of apple, honey-scented towels, and quiet companionship. He learned how to sit still for hours, just breathing beside the crate while Teddy slept. The staff started calling him the bear's grandpa, and the vet joked that Teddy's heartbeat calmed whenever Tom was near. For Tom, it was more than a routine, it was purpose. For the first time since Linda's death, someone depended on him. And that someone had claws and a broken heart just like his. But not everyone was pleased. One afternoon, Tom's son Mark visited from Portland. He hadn't been back since the funeral, and Tom thought maybe they'd reconnect. Instead, Mark stared at the sleeping bear and shook his head. "You're bonding with a wild animal, Dad. This isn't healthy." Tom didn't answer right away. "Neither is pretending everything's fine," he finally said. Mark sighed. "What happens when they take him away? Or when he doesn't survive? You're setting yourself up for more loss." Tom nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I'd rather hurt again than feel nothing at all." Meanwhile, Teddy's condition improved steadily. His fur began growing back, the cuts along his paws healed, and he even started playing with a rubber ball the staff gave him. But emotionally, he was still fragile. He startled easily, cried out in his sleep, and refused food from anyone but Tom. The vet was clear this level of attachment wasn't typical, and it could interfere with his future release. "We may need to transfer him to a different center," she warned one evening. "One where there's less emotional imprinting." That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He sat in his recliner, the scarf still draped over his shoulders, and stared at Linda's empty chair. The house felt cold again, like the heat had been sucked out along with the sound of Teddy's tiny paws. He thought about the vet's words, about what was best for the animal. But he also remembered the way Teddy curled toward his voice, the way he blinked slowly when Tom said his name. There was something unspoken between them. Something too real to ignore. The next morning, Tom made a decision. He drove to the center before sunrise, waiting in the parking lot until someone arrived. When the vet unlocked the door, he was already on the steps. "I want to apply for foster custody," he said before she could speak. "I know it's rare, but I read the statute. If he's not ready for release and can't thrive in a facility, there's precedent for temporary wildlife placement." The vet blinked. "Tom, are you sure?" "That's a huge responsibility." He nodded. "I've got nothing else. And he needs someone who sees more than a wild animal." The paperwork took days. State officials got involved, and a wildlife behaviorist had to assess Tom's property. "Bears can't be house pets," the woman reminded him. "This is a legal gray area." Tom agreed to build an enclosed outdoor structure, attend weekly training, and accept that this was temporary until Teddy could be released or transferred to a sanctuary. Through it all, Teddy watched quietly, resting his chin on his crate bars whenever Tom was nearby. No growls, no fear, just quiet trust. Then came the final meeting. A panel of 3 state representatives, the center's director, and a wildlife enforcement officer sat across from Tom in a cold, government building. They reviewed his case, his background, even interviewed his neighbors. One woman on the board leaned forward. "You're a widower, Mr. Beller. Are you sure this isn't about filling a void?" Tom didn't flinch. "It is," he said. "And maybe that's exactly what we both need. I'm not trying to make him human. I'm just trying to help him heal. And in the process. Maybe I heal too." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the board chair spoke. "You'll be on probationary watch. One slip, and we take him back." Tom stood, heart pounding. "Understood." When he returned to the center, the staff gathered quietly as Teddy was brought out in a reinforced carrier. Tom knelt beside it, opened the small window, and whispered, "We're going home, buddy." Teddy sniffed, then gently pressed his nose to Tom's fingers. No growl, no flinch, just a slow, patient blink. As if to say, it's about time. Bringing Teddy home was nothing like bringing home a dog or a cat. Tom had prepared the old shed out back, converting it into a safe, warm enclosure with insulated walls, a straw-lined bed, and heat lamps provided by the rehab center. There was even a speaker mounted on the wall that played soft forest sounds to soothe Teddy when Tom wasn't nearby. The first night, Tom barely slept. He kept peeking through the shed window, watching as Teddy explored his new space cautiously, pausing every few steps to look toward the house. By the third day, Teddy began to settle in. He recognized the sound of Tom's boots crunching through the snow and would rise from his bed whenever he heard it. There were rules. Of course, no physical contact unless absolutely necessary, no feeding by hand, and strict documentation of Teddy's behavior. But there were also moments in between quiet times when Teddy would sit at the edge of the enclosure while Tom read aloud from Linda's old books, his voice cracking on the lines she used to love. Not everyone approved of what Tom was doing. Word spread through town, and soon the local paper ran a piece. "Widower becomes unlikely guardian to orphan bear cub." Some readers praised him as a hero, others accused him of interfering with nature. Animal rights activists sent mixed messages, some supportive, others demanding the cub be moved to a sanctuary immediately. Tom ignored most of it. He only cared about the bear who had stopped crying in his sleep. That alone told him something was working. The real challenge came one bitter morning when Teddy refused to eat. Tom found him curled tightly in a corner, his breath shallow, his eyes glazed. Panic surged through him. He called the rehab center, who dispatched the vet immediately. As they waited, Tom sat by the shed door, his hand resting on the wood. "Stay with me, buddy. Don't give up." When the vet arrived, she found no clear injury or illness. "Could be emotional," she said gently. "Could be stress from the change. He's still recovering." That night, Tom left the shed door cracked open just a little and slept on a cot beside it. Snow fell again, blanketing the yard in silence. At some point in the night, he woke to a soft sound breathing, slow and steady, right beside him. He turned his head and found Teddy pressed against the wire mesh, his paw resting through it, just inches from Tom's hand. Tom didn't move. He simply whispered, "You're okay. I'm right here." And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the rules, not the doubts, just the quiet bond between two survivors. The following week brought a surprise, a letter from the state. Teddy's provisional care had been extended. The behaviorist's report had noted a measurable decrease in stress indicators since his placement with Tom. Though unconventional, it read, "The animal is responding positively to the structured emotional bond, and further disturbance may hinder recovery." The official stamp of approval meant Tom could breathe easier. For now, they could stay together. One afternoon, as Tom raked the yard near Teddy's enclosure, a young couple approached from the sidewalk. They had a child with them, no more than 6. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Is that the bear from the newspaper?" Tom smiled and waved. "His name's Teddy." The boy stared with wide eyes. "He doesn't look scary." Tom laughed softly. "He's not. He's just healing." The child stood silently for a moment, then said, "Like my grandpa after my dog died." His parents glanced at each other but didn't correct him. Later that night, Tom sat in his kitchen, reading the letter again. He realized something profound. This wasn't just about the bear. It was about what Teddy represented, a living, breathing reminder that healing doesn't always come in the form you expect. Sometimes it has claws, sometimes it comes in a shopping cart. But always, it comes when you need it most, not when you're ready for it. Still, Tom knew the road ahead would be filled with questions. Could he keep this up? What happened when Teddy grew larger? The vet had already warned him. Cubs don't stay small forever. There would be a point where decisions would need to be made about sanctuary, about release, about letting go. But for now, they had today. And today was calm, safe, healing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and bathed the snow in gold, Tom sat near the shed with his thermos of tea. Teddy was resting just inside, eyes half closed, body rising and falling in a rhythm that finally seemed peaceful. "You saved me, you know," Tom said aloud. "I thought I was done. But you made me care again." Teddy lifted his head slightly, sniffed the air, then settled back down with a soft huff, and Tom smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because, for once, something was growing where grief had lived too long. By late March, the snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of damp earth and scattered pine needles around the edge of Tom's yard. Spring hadn't fully arrived, but something about the air had changed. It was lighter, more forgiving. Teddy had changed too. He'd grown noticeably. His once scrawny frame now showed signs of strength, muscle developing along his shoulders, his fur darker and glossier. But with that growth came restlessness. He began pacing more, standing on his hind legs, watching the woods beyond the fence with a longing Tom couldn't ignore. The Wildlife Center assigned a behavioral specialist to evaluate Teddy's progress. Her name was Marla, and she had the calm, watchful presence of someone used to working with things that bite. She visited weekly, taking notes as Teddy played with puzzle feeders or responded to commands. "He's attached to you," she told Tom one afternoon, her eyes tracking the cub. "But his instincts are waking up. He's starting to remember he's wild." Tom nodded slowly. "I see it too. He watches the trees more than me now." Marla sat beside Tom on the old wooden bench he'd built for Linda years ago. "This part's hard," she said. "You've given him something most animals never get: emotional safety. But nature's still pulling at him. That's good. It means you've done your job. The trick is letting go when the time's right." Tom didn't answer. He couldn't. The idea of releasing Teddy, of waking up and not hearing that familiar huff from the shed, filled him with a kind of dread he wasn't ready to name. But others had begun to notice the change. A local wildlife photographer asked to document Teddy's recovery, and soon a series of photos appeared in the county paper. From cart to forest, the unlikely bond between a man and a bear. One shot showed Teddy resting beside the mesh wall, Tom's hand just inches from his paw. Another captured the cub standing tall, his nose tilted toward the tree line behind the property. The images stirred something in the community. Letters began arriving. People wrote to Tom, thanking him for what he'd done, for showing what healing could look like. Even Mark came around again, this time with his own son. They watched from a safe distance as Teddy lumbered around the enclosure, sniffing curiously at a hanging log. "He looks strong," Mark admitted. "Healthier than I expected." Tom smiled, pride and sadness tangled in his throat. "He is, and he's ready for something more," Mark nodded. "You don't have to let him go alone, Dad, not this time." It wasn't much, but it was enough to break something between them that had been stuck since Linda's funeral. Marla brought up the idea of a soft release, a gradual reintroduction to the wild through monitored forest enclosures. "We can start with visits," she said. "See how he reacts to a natural environment, then assess whether full release is possible." Tom agreed, though the words felt like stones in his mouth. He wanted what was best for Teddy, he always had. But that didn't make the idea of goodbye any easier. The first trip into the forest was surreal. Teddy rode a reinforced trailer lined with straw and familiar scents from his shed. Tom followed behind in his truck, hands clenched on the wheel. The release site was part of a protected wildlife corridor to ours north, filled with cedar groves and flowing creeks. As the crate was opened, Teddy hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped out, his movements cautious but purposeful. He sniffed the air, looked back at Tom once, then began to explore. "He's not running," Marla noted, her binoculars tracking him. "That's a good sign. He's learning." For 3 hours, they watched as Teddy wandered, climbed, and even splashed through a shallow stream. He never went far, and when it was time to return, he came back to the crate on his own, curling up inside without protest. It was as if he understood it was only temporary. For now, the process continued over several weeks. Each visit brought Teddy farther into the wild, and each return felt a little more uncertain. "He's getting braver," Tom said after one session. Marla nodded. "So are you." It was true. Tom had begun spending time outside the shed even when Teddy wasn't there, fixing the old garden beds, repairing the fence, even talking to neighbors again. The bear had brought life back to the man, and now the man had to return the gift by letting him go. But fate had one more test in store. One night, a storm blew through the area. Strong winds knocked down trees, and a power line sparked a brush fire near the edge of the release site. The center evacuated all test animals, including Teddy. When Tom arrived the next morning, frantic and shaking, he found the staff loading crates into vans. "He's okay," Marla assured him. Scared but not injured, he fought the tranquilizer, though. Didn't want to leave the forest. That detail broke Tom's heart more than anything else. Teddy had made his choice. He belonged out there now. Not in sheds, not behind fences, but among the trees he once feared. Tom asked if he could see him one last time before they transferred him to the larger forest site. The staff agreed. Inside the holding area, Teddy lay curled in a corner, tired but alert. When he saw Tom, he rose slowly and pressed his nose to the bars. No sound, no growl. Just that same quiet blink, that same thread. Tom crouched beside the cage and placed his hand on the metal. "You did it, Teddy," he whispered. "You made it home." The bear huffed softly, then lay back down. Outside, the wind had calmed. The trees stood silent. And somewhere deep in the woods, a path waited, one that only Teddy could take. Teddy was transferred to a remote, monitored section of the Cascade Range, a protected area with ample food sources and no human traffic. The plan was to keep him under observation for 6 weeks using motion-triggered cameras and radio tracking. If he adapted well hunting, foraging, avoiding people, he'd be officially declared a successful rewilding case. Tom stood at the edge of the trailhead the day of the release, watching as the crate door swung open. Teddy hesitated only a second before stepping out into the underbrush and vanishing without a sound. The silence afterward was unbearable. Tom stood there for a long time, gripping the scarf in his coat pocket, unsure whether to cry or smile. The forest swallowed Teddy whole, the way life swallows moments you never expect to lose. Marla touched his shoulder gently. "You gave him the most natural ending possible," but Tom shook his head. "This wasn't an ending, not for him. Maybe not for me either." He looked into the woods, hoping for one more glance. It didn't come. But something in his chest felt lighter, like permission. Weeks passed, and Tom adjusted to the quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the numb silence of grief, but a calm earned through connection. He still visited the center sometimes, talking with the staff and even volunteering to build new enclosures. "You're the reason our donations tripled," the director told him one afternoon. "People connect with what you did." Tom just shrugged. "I didn't do it for people. I did it for a scared little cub in a shopping cart." One afternoon, Marla showed up at his porch with a USB drive and a box of photos. "Motion camera footage," she said, smiling. "Thought you'd want to see for yourself." That night, Tom sat at Linda's old desk and watched the footage on his laptop. There was Teddy, larger now, climbing trees, catching fish, rolling in a meadow of wildflowers like a child rediscovering joy. In one clip, he stopped at the edge of a ridge and looked back just a moment. Just long enough for Tom to believe he remembered. Tom started journaling again. Not the heavy, grief-laden entries of the past, but notes, reflections, bits of insight from the months he and Teddy had shared. He wrote down the way the cub had responded to music, how he used to press his nose to the book when Tom read aloud. "He reminded me what it means to care without guarantee," one entry read. "To love something wild, and let it go anyway." The pages became a sort of tribute not to Teddy's struggle, but to the healing they gave each other. Word of the story continued to spread. A local reporter nominated Tom for a regional humanitarian award, and a wildlife conservation group reached out asking him to speak. He hesitated, unsure he had anything worth saying. But when he finally stood before the small crowd at a town hall event, his voice didn't shake. "I didn't rescue a bear," he told them. I sat beside one until he remembered who he was. And while I did, I remembered who I was too. Mark was in the audience that day, his son perched quietly on his lap. After the event, he hugged his father without speaking. No big declarations, just presence. Tom felt the unspoken apology in that hug, the kind of forgiveness that doesn't need words. Later that evening, they all sat around Tom's small dining table, eating stew and laughing over old stories. The house didn't feel haunted anymore, it felt full. Not because Teddy was there but because love had returned in his wake. The final confirmation came on a breezy afternoon in late May. Marla stopped by with a clipboard and a smile. "It's official," she said. "Teddy has been declared fully rewilded. No signs of human-seeking behavior. He's living as he should be, wild, free." Tom didn't cry. He just nodded slowly and poured them both a cup of tea. "That's the best news I've heard in years," he said. And he meant it. Because for the first time in a long while, good news didn't feel like a stranger. In the days that followed, Tom started building something new in the yard where Teddy's enclosure once stood. A memorial garden not somber, but bright. Full of native plants, fruiting bushes, and a wooden bench with a plaque, "For Teddy who reminded us to live." Neighbors came by to help plant. Children drew pictures of bears. One elderly woman left a note that read, "Thank you for not giving up on him or yourself." Tom still walked the edge of the woods sometimes, scarf around his neck, thermos in hand. He didn't expect to see Teddy again, and maybe that was the point. But every now and then, he'd pause and stare at a rustling in the trees, smile to himself, and whisper, "You did good, kid." Then he'd turn around and walk home not with grief in his heart, but with something better. A quiet kind of peace, the kind that only comes after you let something go, and it keeps growing anyway. Tom's days settled into a rhythm that was both new and familiar. The mornings were quieter now, without the rustle of straw or the sound of small paws shifting in the shed, but the silence no longer hurt. It held warmth. He spent his time tending to the memorial garden, writing letters to children who sent drawings of Teddy, and walking the trails behind his house with a small notepad in his coat pocket. There was no checklist, no agenda, just presence. And for a man who once stared at the clock to fill time, that was a revolution. Every so often, the Wildlife Center sent him updates on other rescues. Another cub, this one found near a riverbank, emaciated but alert. Tom always read the reports carefully, underlining phrases like responsive or stabilizing. He never asked to take in another animal. Deep down, he knew Teddy wasn't just a cub, he had been the bridge between life before and life after. You don't repeat a miracle. You honor it. One day, Tom received a letter postmarked from Alaska. Inside was a hand-drawn card from a 4th grade class who had read about his story during a unit on wildlife. "We learned that caring isn't weakness," one message said. Another read, "I want to help animals when I grow up, just like you." Tom read every line, his eyes misting over. He pinned the card to the bulletin board above his desk. It sat next to Teddy's first photo in the snow, back when hope was still just a fragile maybe. A few weeks later, the local high school invited him to speak to students about empathy and resilience. He hesitated, but ultimately agreed. Standing before rows of teenagers, he told them the truth. Not just about the bear, but about Linda, about the aching loneliness that settled in when she died. "I didn't rescue that cub because I'm brave," he said. "I rescued him because I knew what it felt like to be left behind." And that's when the room got quiet in the way that means something is landing exactly where it's supposed to. That night, Tom wrote in his journal, "He didn't just teach me how to love again, he reminded me that I'm still capable of being loved, even if it doesn't look like it used to. It was the kind of truth you earn. The kind you only get by sitting in silence with another broken thing until it starts to heal." And that healing, slow and uneven as it was, began to ripple outward. Not just in Tom's life, but in the lives of those who heard the story. Eventually, a regional wildlife magazine published a full feature on Tom and Teddy, including never-before-seen photos, handwritten notes, and a timeline of Teddy's journey from abandonment to rewilding. The issue sold out in 3 days. One editor remarked, "It's not just about the bear. It's about all of us finding reasons to keep going when we're certain there aren't any left." Tom read that line twice, then clipped it out and taped it to his fridge, right next to an old photo of Linda smiling in the garden. His home, once so hollow, now carried the sounds of life again. Not of Teddy, but of visitors, neighbors dropping off baked goods, students asking questions, even strangers passing through town who had read about the man with the bear and wanted to see the garden. Tom never turned them away. "Teddy's not here," he'd tell them. "But what he left behind is," and then he'd offer them tea and a place to sit, and the garden would do the rest. One morning, Tom stepped outside and found a small carved wooden bear left on his doorstep. No note, just the figure, perfectly smooth, standing with its nose tilted toward the sky. He placed it in the center of the garden, surrounded by wild flowers. It became something of a local landmark. People started calling the space Teddy's Corner, and before long, a group of volunteers offered to help maintain it year-round. "Healing's not supposed to be private," one woman said. "Thank you for making it something we could all share." That fall, Tom received an invitation to speak at a national conservation conference in Denver. The keynote would be about human-animal connection and emotional recovery. "We believe your story captures something essential," the letter read. He debated saying no, but as he sat at the garden bench, scarf around his neck, the carved bear at his feet, he realized that the story no longer belonged to him alone. It was part of something bigger, something still growing. So he packed his bag, folded Linda's scarf carefully inside, and flew to Denver for the first time in decades. On stage, he didn't read from a script. He just told the story the way it happened. The shopping cart, the storm, the decision not to walk away. "I didn't know what I was doing," he said. "I just knew that something small and scared needed me. And that was enough to get me moving again." The room rose in applause, not just for the bear but for what the bear helped him become. After Denver, Tom returned home to find a stack of letters waiting, handwritten, typed, emailed, and printed. People from all over the country had watched a video of his speech online. "Veterans, widows, teachers, teenagers, your story reminded me not to give up. I started volunteering at a shelter because of you. My daughter and I planted a garden in memory of her cat, like your Teddy's Corner." Tom read every one. He placed them in a shoebox labeled "Ongoing Miracles" and tucked it under his bed, beside Linda's old quilt. Seasons changed, as they always do. The chill of winter returned, but this time it brought with it a comfort Tom hadn't felt in years. The woods no longer felt distant, but connected, like he was part of something living. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, he imagined he could hear Teddy's huff echoing through the trees. Not a memory, not a fantasy, just a reminder that something wild had passed through his life and left it better. On the one-year anniversary of Teddy's discovery, Tom organized a small gathering in the garden. Families, volunteers, and children came together to light candles, share stories, and leave tokens at the carved wooden bear. One little girl placed a note at its feet. "Thank you for helping the man not be alone." Tom read it aloud, his voice catching slightly. "That's all we ever really want, isn't it? To not be alone." The crowd nodded. Some cried, some held hands, everyone understood. Not long after, Tom received a call from the Wildlife Center. Another cub had been found, injured and orphaned near the state border. The director asked if he'd consider mentoring a younger couple who wanted to foster. "You showed us what's possible," she said. "You don't have to do it again. But you could help someone else do it right." Tom thought for a long time before agreeing. He wouldn't relive the past, but he could pass it on. He met the couple Jesse and Miu on a brisk morning in early spring. They were nervous, kind, and full of questions. He walked them through the same routines he once learned, offered the same caution Marla had once given him. "Don't expect gratitude, expect growth." Then he handed Jesse a small object wrapped in cloth. Inside was a copy of Teddy's first photo, the one taken in the shopping cart. "Don't forget what they look like when the world gives up on them," he said. "That's how you'll know what you're really fighting for." From then on, Tom became something of a quiet figure in the wildlife community. Not a leader, not a hero, but a steward, someone people turned to when the lines between help and interference felt blurry. He never claimed to have the answers, only the story. And he told it every time with the same quiet reverence, as though saying it aloud still helped him believe it had really happened. That a man lost in grief had found a bear and in doing so, found himself. He often ended those talks with a single line, the same one each time. "We think we're rescuing them. But more often than not, they're the ones rescuing us." And with that, he'd fold his hands behind his back, nod slightly, and step away. Let the silence do the rest. Years passed, slowly, Kindly, Tom grew older. The garden flourished, new families took up the mission. And in the heart of the forest, somewhere deep and untouched, a fully grown black bear with a faint scar on his nose still roamed. They never saw each other again, but Tom never stopped believing they were connected. Not by ownership, not by memory, but by the simple act of not walking away. One morning, Tom didn't come out to tend the garden. A neighbor knocked, then called, then let herself in. She found him in his chair, the scarf folded on his lap, a notebook open beside him. He had passed quietly in his sleep, a half-finished sentence still visible on the page. He didn't just save a bear. The pen had slipped from his hand, but the rest of the world picked up where he left off. They held his memorial at Teddy's corner. Dozens came. The bench overflowed with flowers. A local artist painted a mural of Tom and Teddy in the parking lot where it all began. The town petitioned to name the park after him. And every spring, school children planted sunflowers along the fence line the way he once had, before hope had a name. Because in the end, Tom Beller didn't just save a bear. He found something worth living for. He showed the world that even the most wounded among us can still choose to love. He built a bridge from grief to grace, and he left behind not just a legacy but a path, for every soul brave enough to follow it.